it's okay to change. Like just because you did it once one way doesn't mean that that's exactly how you have to do it or stick with it. If it's not working out or if the tool itself isn't working out, I think people are invested in the sunk cost of, we're already here, we already did it. But if it doesn't fit your process or the process that you are aiming for, change it.
Welcome to RevOps Rockstars, in pursuit of unicorns. I'm David Carnes.
And I'm Jarin Chu. Join us as we interview RevOps leaders to explore the challenges they have faced, the biggest lessons they've learned, and what they think makes a RevOps rockstar.
This show is brought to you by OpFocus, on a mission to help companies run their businesses better by letting you focus on growth while we scale your operations. Let's get this show on the road.
Today's guest of the podcast brings over 5 years of RevOps experience. This person helps companies implement best practices and drive go-to-market efficiencies to support their growth. She is a proven leader who has implemented and scaled operations teams in-house in various software companies. And now she works with many companies to increase operating leverage from the investor side. We're so thrilled to have to the podcast today, VP of Revenue Operations at Mainsail Partners, Megan Heinz. Welcome to the podcast, Meg.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
First off, we always love to hear some battle scars and battle stories. And I would love to hear from either your experience working directly within a company or helping advise RevOps leaders now. What is something that you tend to see RevOps leaders learn the hard way?
Learn the hard way. Good question. Just because it's how it's happening doesn't mean it's the right way. Or if it's always been done that way, doesn't mean it's the right way. So I can say that from experience, and I can say I oftentimes see people coming into new roles, kind of running into that. And so I would suggest anybody that's either new to a company or new to the role, don't assume that the data is right. Don't assume that the processes are right coming in. Do yourself a favor and do kind of a full audit of the customer journey and really start to understand where's the data, where's the inputs coming from, and also identify any of those gaps that are there, because they likely are. Startups and SaaS companies have grown quickly. And so, there's always some holes that didn't get filled along the way.
I feel like there's a story or a personal experience of what you're describing and alluding to as holes.
Yeah. So it was more on kind of our embedded payments information side, but really just taking the data from our partners as truth. When I took that over, and as I was going through it over a few months, I really started to say, like, this doesn't seem right. There's no way that we're making this margin on this group of customers at the price we're set at. And turns out kind of the whole relationship price setting process was wrong. And so they had a different expectation of what that price was than we did. And so we were losing out on some revenue there that we quickly resolved.
And this was when you were in-house leading RevOps yourself.
This is when I was in-house leading RevOps. Yes.
So Meg, we're really thrilled to talk to you, especially the fact that you're in this operating role now. Tell us about Mainsail Partners.
Yeah. So Mainsail growth equity firm based now out of Austin and San Francisco. And we really look to invest in rapidly growing bootstrap software companies that we believe have the potential to be category leaders in their own right. And then once we're on the other side of it, we really look to drive that value creation. And that's via our dedicated operations team, which I'm a part of that ops team now, but really purpose built to meet founders and leaders where they are and really help them scale their businesses and accelerate growth.
And tell us more specifically about your role.
I partner with our portfolio companies in a few different ways, really depending upon their needs. So we can either be hands-on within the company, within the systems, within the processes, really acting as if we are a part of that business. Or we can bring, our many years of best practices and experience and hard lessons learned in some cases to really be kind of that advisory or that brainstorm resource for any of our leaders within the company to help them grow in whatever form or facet they're growing in.
So depending on the nature of the investment, you must walk in the door to companies that literally have no RevOps function. And then you probably have the other end of the spectrum of companies that are a bit more mature with that. So really must be quite thrilling to do what you do.
It is. It's never the same. Every day is different. So that's what makes it exciting. I think that's probably the case for everyone in RevOps, but I guess I'm magnified since I see that across multiple different companies every day.
How do you measure success?
That's a good question. So I would say that two forms. Success for my RevOps leaders is really going to be, inherent in the title, RevOps. Like, are we really truly helping revenue grow and expand in an efficient manner? And so tying back any of the RevOps strategic initiatives to the growth or to the retention of any of that revenue is truly success. And then I'd also say personal success too. So really making sure that all of our RevOps leaders are in a place where they feel like they're continuously growing and learning, whether that be expanding their business acumen or maybe learning and integrating new systems. It should never, in my opinion, success should never feel like you're stagnant. There should always feel like there's something else that you're working towards.
A little earlier, you touched on pre-investment work that you do. So the due diligence. Is there anything that's a red flag within RevOps that you find during due diligence?
Is there anything that's a red flag? That's a good question. Definitely lean a lot on our investment team to understand, the full health of the business too. But I wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything that's a red flag. I think there's a lot that is opportunities, to put a positive spin on it, and really outlines kind of the emphasis of, when we invest, where do we start? And a lot of times in bootstrap businesses, that's truly the process. That's understanding the full customer lifecycle and making sure that the data that we have is operational, meaning, in diligence, you may have 30 days to pull information together, and you may be able to piece that together between a bunch of different systems or people across the organization, but really having that information on hand to make the day-to-day decisions and really be in the hands of the reps or the go-to-market individuals that are talking to your customers day to day is really key. So, I know I kind of changed up that question a little bit, but
I think it's great. And one quick follow-on would be, I'm curious. There must be a triangulation if you're working with an existing portco, and they look to do an acquisition. Are you involved in helping with them think through what that'll mean for them? Probably the most complex work that we do is the acquisition integration work as it impacts the tech stack.
Yes, definitely. There's a side to think about it in terms of, how does this revenue impact kind of the overall revenue of the business? Is this the right fit for our customers? And then how do we go about kind of the buying process for any add-ons or M&A? But to your point, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that has to go into, from finance all the way to tech stack. Really helping our portfolio companies think through not only what needs to happen, but what are the sequence of things that should happen, and what has to happen out of the gate versus what has to happen within, 90 days to a year of the acquisition. So, and that definitely varies by acquisition. They're never the same. So again, always interesting.
Yeah, I think that prioritization and sequencing has been a big part of our roadmap work over the years. So that's great to hear that you help the portfolio companies think through that as well.
Meg, can you paint me a little bit more of a picture around where or how mature are your portfolios when Mainsail gets involved? Are there already established RevOps teams? Are there companies where, hey, they're just starting the RevOps function? What's kind of the gamut of types of portcos you're helping with?
Yeah, good question. I would say it's all over the map, but it generally leans more towards not necessarily having that RevOps function, as I would define it. And so there may be individuals within that are really there to help optimize process or optimize data or have it in place. They're just not solely dedicated to that RevOps space. So I would say most often, and that comes with the territory, right, of bootstrapped. It's impressive to see what these companies have done just on their own without any capital, outside capital coming in. And so a lot of times it's really either heavy product focus or heavy sales focus, but may not necessarily have that full process or full data understanding. And so, yeah, implementing RevOps and implementing that data structure and that full customer journey process is number one when we come in.
Yeah, that's really helpful because it seems like at that stage of opportunity, as you've described, there seems to always be so many things that they could do to level up. But how do you choose very wisely how to deploy your capital first, right? There is the order of operations we need to consider in terms of how much impact it will have. And it sounds like you're prioritizing certainly that data structure, the foundational architecture first before some of the other aspects.
Exactly. Yes.
Knowing that some of your RevOps functions are less baked than others, how do you prefer to engage with RevOps teams?
That was a good way to say it, less baked than others. So totally depends. And we like to, again, meet the founders and meet the leaders where it fits best for them. And so generally, if a RevOps leader comes in, I like to do one-on-ones with them. Also getting heavily involved in any of the strategic projects that they might be looking at initially. Whether that be any new system implementations or designing a whole new sales structure, or kind of setting up onboarding or implementations in such a way that it's an easy handoff from sales to onboarding to customer success or support or whatever that might look like on the end. So again, really dependent. We have a lot of great best practices, a lot of great playbooks that have worked in the past, but really like to generally assess where the companies are and what their strategic needs are initially. But I think one of the big value adds is really just getting our leaders within each portfolio company together, because they're the ones in the end that are, day to day in the business, experiencing any of the issues or opportunities. So we have a revenue operations leadership group internal at Mainsail, where we pull in all of our RevOps leaders across the portfolio, monthly, quarterly, get everyone together either on kind of a hot topic that either they bring to us or we bring to them, and then really have them just discuss amongst the group and understand what everybody else is doing, because I think that's one of the best learning opportunities as well.
Yeah, that to me makes a ton of sense. And we experience it in a similar way with a lot of the companies and RevOps leaders we work with. Sometimes the best kind of learning is simply to have folks going through similar challenges and similar problems talk to each other, right? Sharing across the industry, sharing across different kinds of verticals that they're in. David and I, we both host on a monthly basis these roundtables where they're really curated forums for folks of similar company sizes or similar levels to be able to just share. And sometimes they might be more on the marketing ops side. Sometimes they might be more on the sales ops side. RevOps has that flavor that differs company to company. And being able to, I think, help them hear also from peers that aren't in their company and what they're challenged by and like their perspective is so huge in advancing the understanding cross-functionally.
Yes. And it's amazing to see, these are individuals that are so passionate about not only, their businesses, but what they can do to help kind of the customers and RevOps overall. And so really seeing their excitement and getting involved and helping somebody else's, problem or getting to that solution is really exciting.
Yeah. And it's also very rewarding to be able to
Yes.
see that kind of impact beyond just the immediate team and company you're in.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you mentioned getting involved in not only one-on-ones, but also some of the more strategic conversations with portcos, some of the bigger initiatives, I'm interested to hear, given the different kinds of things that a company could prioritize in, say, the first 6 months or first year of receiving investment from Mainsail, what kinds of initiatives have you observed RevOps teams getting themselves more into trouble with? Like, what are the more challenging, stickier kinds of initiatives where you're like, oh, you got to be careful with that. Like, you want to make sure you plan ahead before they jump in.
I would say anything that has to do with deploying a new piece of technical function. So, CRMs come to mind where initial thought, you're like, oh yeah, this is easy, flowing from marketing to sales to onboarding, customer success. You're like, oh yeah, I got this. I have this customer journey. And then everyone kind of comes out of the woodwork to say like, oh, and this, and this, and this integration. So, really making sure that if you're doing any sort of technical integration, that you're over communicative on what it is you're doing, what it is you're not doing, and anything that might be staged along the way. And so in order to get to that, MVP, that V1 of full function, everyone's able to use it, but it may not have all the bells and whistles yet that you want it to have, is really outlining what are those stages of implementation and being very clear to everybody about what it's going to have and what it's not going to have.
David and I are both chuckling here in the background because we hear that a lot.
Yeah, I was going to say amen, but I didn't know if that'd be appropriate.
And I think a lot of times what's so interesting about founder-led businesses, founder-led SaaS companies, is they had to bootstrap their way along, and they're very resourceful, and they find ways to say, hey, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to learn on the job. I'm going to figure it out. And when it comes to something like RevOps or something as done as many times as be that a CRM implementation across the board or specific functions, there are people out there that have done it over and over again. Like, you don't actually need to figure it out yourself, right?
Yes.
And something we end up joking about for folks who end up saying, hey, we're going to try to take a stab ourselves, is we'll see you in 6 months. As consultants, we're like, we can help you prevent yourselves from stepping in kind of these common pitfalls. Just stand on our shoulders, please. Like, we beg you to just stand on our shoulders and go from there.
I'm sure you have seen it all at this point.
There's definitely some repeat themes that we would love for companies to avoid.
Yeah.
So you mentioned these big initiatives. They're very transformative. You talked about staging, the importance of being able to say, hey, we're going to do just this MVP now, and then we can roll out additional functionality as we go, or based on, let's say, adoption or based on certain key metrics. Can you comment a bit about what are some of those kind of milestones that you look for to say, hey, I'm really seeing improvement and progress within that RevOps function?
Yeah, I think really implementing all of the reporting necessary, again, to be at the hands of the individuals, not only kind of at that leadership level, but at the day-to-day go-to-market function level, to be able to help to drive their metrics. And so, and I'm sure you guys have heard too along the way of, people tracking stuff outside of the system, whatever that system may be. And you're like, well, why aren't you tracking it in, name the CRM or name the system? And it's like, oh, I don't trust the data, right? So really getting to the point where we understand, we trust that the data in there is accurate, and then we can drive insights from that data, I think is truly success of, implementing a new tech stack or really any sort of kind of milestone that or strategic initiative that RevOps is going for. It's, is the data right? That's inherent on, hey, we got the process right. And not only is the data there, everyone can see it, it's operational. And then, oh, by the way, we have all of these insights that we can provide from that data to make better business decisions.
Yeah, I can definitely understand the urgency, especially coming from the investor side, to be able to see the reporting be live and also trust the data behind it so that you can actually help advise and help devise the strategy for that company moving forward.
Yes.
Megan, I'd love to ask you about some RevOps trends. Are there any tools that you've been impressed with lately?
Any tools that I've been impressed with? I'm a big fan of Salesforce. I know that it's kind of the giant in the industry, but I think there's a lot of things that you can do with that. And I also really do like outreach.io. I think, there's people are getting savvy to just the one-off, sales calls that are coming in. So really having a holistic cadence or strategy around how you're connecting with your prospects or how you're connecting with your customers is really key. And I think that's a good leverage point too.
And when when the portfolio companies adopt those tools, are you seeing them do an MVP, let's say with outreach, or are they expanding into some of the more advanced features?
I think, again, it's staged on how it's released. And I think part of that is getting to understand not only the capabilities and the functionality that's in there, but also the expansion of process as they grow and as the team is able to get some standardization and some additional data. And so, I think you implement something and then you start to understand once everybody's on the same cadence, let's take prospects, for example, of, oh, we have all of our brand new prospects within this one BDR cadence. And then we start to understand, well, is this working? Is this not? What's our conversion rates here? And that's where you can start to implement some, A/B testing to understand, is this different messaging better? Is it better if I, call them first versus email them first? And I'm giving very specific examples now. But I think as you start to understand and process that initial data that's coming from the system, you start to kind of expand into those advanced features that it offers because it supports the expansion of your process overall.
Well, that's great. I appreciate the recommendation around the staging. It's such good reinforcement. I think a lot of companies will try to dive in, take advantage of too many advanced features before they've learned the basics or been successful with the basics.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, it's okay to change. Like, just because you did it once one way doesn't mean that that's exactly how you have to do it or stick with it. If it's not working out or if the tool itself isn't working out, I think people are invested in the sunk cost of, we're already here, we already did it. But if it doesn't fit your process or the process that you are aiming for, change it.
I think that's such great advice. We've been seeing the impacts of the economy in the SaaS world for about 7 months now. We started seeing quiet rounds of layoffs. We started seeing sort of shifts in what's happening within sales cycles and that sort of thing. Are there any specific actions or recommendations that you're giving the RevOps leaders within your portfolio to better handle this tricky economy?
Yeah, good question. I'll say this first because we just kind of touched on it, but really reviewing that tech stack and making sure that it fits the process that you are designing, and also evaluating it for what the full technology can do. I think a lot of times in really fast growing software businesses, we implement tools that are high designed for one function or one facet of the business. But in reality, if it's working for sales in terms of an outreach opportunity, maybe it also works for customer success too. So can you leverage more of your teams or more of your entire or company process within one technology. Again, that helps streamline some of the data there too. So you're not having to pass that information along multiple different technologies across the board. And then I also think that there is going to be a higher concentration in retention, in the focus of customer retention and customer retention data overall. So, I think we're entering an environment where people are maybe a little bit more hesitant to buy. And so really refocusing on the customer and understanding, are we meeting that customer's expectations, that needs? How do we either expand that existing customer revenue, or how do we really focus on just retaining it?
So that old net negative retention, that was sort of an exciting thing that sounded great. And what did they say? Bessemer might have said, a 1% increase in net negative retention would equal 100 million in valuation. I think that was just a few years ago.
Yeah.
Now it's vital to do that.
Exactly.
Meg, I'm interested in whether you've seen some effective ways for RevOps to step up when it comes to things like customer retention or encouraging organic growth. What are the ways we can support sales better? What are the ways we can support CS better so that there's a more natural or more seamless, less friction-driven process or set of data that they can use to action upon within those departments?
Yeah, I think anything we can do to wholly understand the health of our existing customers is great. And so oftentimes within our companies, that looks like a health score. So really evaluating a couple different facets depending upon the business itself, but how they're using the data, what aspects of the platform are they using on a regular basis? How do they stack up against, the existing customer base, the rest of the customer base overall? And really starting to outline for our customer success teams, where do our customers sit? And that helps drive, do we focus on retention, or is there an opportunity for expansion? Are our customers really, in the red, they're not using our product, we should be concerned? Or is everybody generally happy and using a product, and we have the opportunity to help their businesses more by providing them, additional product opportunities, or maybe we already have some different aspects of our business that they're not using that they could be using to better their business. And then that also plays into sales too. So full circle, you can understand, who's your healthy customer, who's not, and maybe that helps focus our ideal customer profile for marketing and sales to say, hey, this vertical maybe isn't as good as this other vertical that we're supporting. They don't generate as much revenue. They're not staying as long. We're just really not purpose built for their specific industry. We should really focus on, this other vertical over here.
A couple of things I'm hearing you say, Meg, is one, segmentation within the customer base to better understand whether there are trends within a certain group of users and how they engage with your product. The other thing I'm also hearing you say is looking at a lot more usage data for really what sounds like leading indicators, right? How can RevOps help with analyzing leading indicators as it comes to product usage so that CS or sales can proactively, come up with campaigns or reach out or engage them in order to improve retention?
Yes, exactly. And also when you're providing this data in RevOps, you have this unique experience that you have kind of this 50,000 foot view of the entire business that you think is evident, but may not be as evident, especially as people are so heads down focused on their functional area. So really kind of providing the data, but also providing the insights based on everything that you're seeing across the business. I think oftentimes, especially newer RevOps leaders, provide the data and just provide the data and are a little bit more fearful to say, this data means XYZ, or I think based on this, we should do XYZ. But really have that confidence to know that you have that view across the business, and don't be afraid to speak up to say, here's my opinion and here's the data that supports that opinion.
So Meg, external to Mainsail Partners, are there resources that you steer your RevOps leaders to continue their growth and learning?
Yeah, a couple different ways. I think it's totally dependent on kind of what they're looking for. For example, we have some of our RevOps leaders that were really born from different functional areas within the business, whether that be marketing or sales. And so really driving them towards kind of overall business acumen and documentation and understanding kind of the overall performance goals of a SaaS business, versus some people that are really, specific to certain technical aspects. It's like, oh, okay, I've been in RevOps forever, but I've never worked with this tool, or I've never kind of dug into this facet of reporting. And so kind of all over the map in terms of like where we direct them to. But I will say we also have a lot of internal documentation at Mainsail that we provide to all of our portfolio companies, because it's learnings and best practices that we've collected over the past 20 years that, even though every business is different, it always seems to ring true in some form or function to be able to support kind of their growth overall. So really try to understand, where are they coming from in RevOps? What are their goals in RevOps? And then providing the information that can help best grow into that position.
Sounds like an excellent set of resources.
Yeah.
One of the trends we're hearing a lot from our customers on when it comes to transformation in this current market condition, and also just advancing kind of the maturity internally, is really around product-led growth. PLG just seems to be one of the hottest topics out there. Are there any resources, if Mainsail is recommending your portcos and doing so, are there any resources that your team helps point RevOps leaders to when it comes to learning more about PLG, or maybe thinking about PLG adoption even?
Yeah, I'll say that, I spoke about our operations team kind of a little bit, but only in my kind of little corner. But really, we have an expansive team of individuals that have, been in consulting or have worked in companies and in high growth SaaS companies, and so have that experience. And so generally anything for PLG, we have, some wonderful individuals on our team that I direct them towards that are more experienced in that area than I am.
Fair. Great. And we always love to, share whatever latest learnings or communities that there might be, because I feel like everyone is trying to learn very quickly, drinking from the fire hose with all the changes happening out there. If you think of resources along our conversation, please do share.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of a lot of kind of the co-ops that are out there too, because it's a great place to kind of just drop some knowledge or ask a question. I think oftentimes in this environment, we're, a team of one or two, sometimes siloed within companies. And so it's great to, again, just be able to grab that perspective. So, any of the RevOps co-ops or Wizards of Ops out there is fantastic.
Yeah, I think we found through the start of COVID and up through till today that the roundtables are so powerful for that. So we encourage any of our listeners to take advantage of groups that they find to just get out and interact with other folks also in the RevOps space. Yes,
it's great not only for understanding any problems that you have, but also being proactive in what you could be doing. So even if you're like, no, I'm pretty content at where we're at with RevOps or, within the business, it's always great to kind of get some new ideas out there and understand what you could be doing.
So Meg, the first part of the podcast, we learned a lot from you, and that's been awesome. Thank you so much. We'd love to shift and learn a little bit more about you.
Okay.
So you're based in Denver, Colorado.
I am, yes.
You went to University of Kansas. You did a bachelor's in accounting and marketing. You went for a master's in accounting. And I know that early in your career, you were doing some pretty heavy duty accounting. And I think that's an incredible foundation for what you're doing now. You prior to your current role, you were at Gusto, and
Mhm.
you're leading revenue insights and operations. I'm curious, so if you could take us all the way back to from when you studied, and how did this path unfold where you're now working in private equity on an operating team?
Yeah. Again, started out in public accounting. I really liked numbers growing up, and it seemed like a great opportunity. I also had a degree in marketing because I really liked that creative aspect. Um, and then got into public accounting, really loved the puzzle that it created, trying to figure out on the audit side where all the numbers were coming from and how everything tied together. Um, that's about all I liked on that side. No offense to any of those diehard
Just
accountants out there. It just was not
the,
for me.
the few
Uh,
software companies that I worked for, you'd see these groups of auditors come in and they
yeah.
just hunker in a conference room for what, a month? And
Yep.
it just
Yeah.
how they could stay awake and function.
Always such a bad connotation, right? The auditors are here. But I learned a lot of foundational knowledge, I'd say, for what I have today, a lot of understanding of discipline and how I document any of the detail that I'm going through. But really had the opportunity, a friend was working at a software company in Denver, and they had this role, and it was operations and analytics. And she's like, I don't know, it just sounds like you'd be really good at this. And so I went there, and, typical software startup, everyone was like, throwing darts and had on leggings. It was completely 180 from what I was used to in the public accounting world, but really fell in love with the company and the people there because everyone was so passionate about what they were doing and helping customers. And so really jumped into the ops and analytics role. And it's funny because, when I first came in, one of my first priorities was, hey, we have this Salesforce implementation, but no one's really using it the same, and it doesn't really generate any of the data that we need. And so it was kind of presented as like, oh, there's this auditor coming in to look at Salesforce, which is now a joke.
I'm thinking of Star Wars theme music in the background when the Empire shows up.
But, really had the opportunity to dive into that and work really closely with our sales team and our new sales leader that came in, work really closely with finance and customer success. And so I got to get my hands kind of into every aspect of the business in terms of overall process, customer data, what we could be doing. And so it was really kind of RevOps before RevOps was a thing. And that was my first exposure to private equity. So Mainsail was actually the investor in that company at the time. So stayed kind of post-exit from Mainsail for a little while, and then had the opportunity to go to Gusto, VC-backed, and really work at a little bit larger company that still kind of felt like a startup in their revenue operations space, and really kind of support the teams. And again, expanding how do we utilize this customer data and how can we make better informed decisions overall and present that information to our forward-facing teams. And then had the opportunity to actually come to Mainsail and get to work with all of our different portfolio companies in a way that, I did it. I was in the portfolio, I was an operator within the business, and I get to take that experience and really help all of our portfolio companies that are kind of in that same position that I was a couple of years ago.
That is so awesome. Thank you for sharing that story. To go one step further, if you could give yourself advice going back to day one in your current role, what would you say?
Advice going back to day one in my current role, I think it would be the same advice that I give everyone else. Is just, have a strong opinion, have it be data backed, but really have a strong opinion and don't be afraid to share it. Because a lot of times, again, you might have experience or expertise that you may assume that everybody else has, but they're kind of looking to you to be that person to say like, oh, based on this data and based on what I've seen historically, this is what I think we should do. And you may be wrong. You're going to be wrong, right? No one's right 100% of the time. But having that conviction and having that data to back your opinions, I think is, the advice I would give to anyone, including a young me.
Oh, that's great. And I think from the consulting side, what we've experienced is the expectation of being prescriptive. So having that opinion, sticking by it and saying, having the conviction to say, this is the path forward, given what you've shared, your goals, your strategy, this is what the path that we should take to support that growth over the next time period.
Yeah.
It's clear, Megan, the conversation we've had thus far, that you get a ton of personal reward from working and seeing how you can help a lot of companies with budding RevOps teams kind of level up and increase the impact that they bring to the business. Outside of work, like I know that can get pretty intense because you're working with a bunch of portcos at the same time, right? Outside of work, how do you unwind? Like, what do you do to keep yourself fresh? How do you stay on top of your own top A game? What are the things that bring you energy?
Yeah. So I have 2 young girls. So getting to play with them every day and watching them grow is just the best gift I could have ever asked for. So that takes up a lot of my time. But, being in Denver, I have every outdoor activity at my fingertips pretty much in my backyard. So love getting out, hiking, exploring. That's always fun. And then I also am really obsessed with DIY projects. So I have a vast collection of power tools that I like to build and expand on my home. I think my husband's probably sick of me rearranging our house or adding or subtracting walls in some instances, but love anything DIY with power tools, mixes kind of that numbers and creative aspect that I love.
Sounds like a workshop in the making.
Yes.
What was the last thing you built?
I built some built-ins in our playroom to hide all the toys. So it's, they're all nicely tucked away until my girls get home from school. So
I love what you're saying around being able to tie, obviously family is so important. It puts everything in context, right? Like it doesn't matter how big of a fire you're dealing with at work. Like you come back and you're like, okay, this is what really matters. Yes. And also the opportunity to use your hands, right? So much of our work is incredibly intellectual, theoretical, sometimes conceptual, and to be able to come down and actually feel really grounded by seeing something come together. You might be the second guest on the podcast that's really into using power tools and woodworking and that sort of thing, which is quite a surprise.
We'll have to monitor that as a trend.
Yeah, maybe there's some correlation there. We'll have to track.
Final question, Meg. You've been so generous sharing your experiences with us. I know along the way, there's probably been a lot of people in your career and your path that have helped you get to where you are. Who are some of the RevOps pros out there that have given you a boost, been mentors for you, or just folks you admire who you're like, hey, these are people I want to, highlight, shout out to, continue learning from?
Yeah. I would have to say Rosalind Santa Elena. I think, everybody knows her. She's been a huge advocate for RevOps overall, but also women in RevOps in the workspace. And so very much admire her for what she's done in terms of, advancing her career, but also growing her family. So she's been a huge inspiration to me. And then there's an individual, Jeff Gardner. So he was the CEO at the first SaaS company I started at, and was very supportive in all of my career and everything that I could do, even when I didn't yet believe in myself to do it. And so very grateful to him when he said, oh, you'll figure it out. I'll help you, and then I also work closely with an individual, Phil Stern. And so we have a joke. I've worked with Phil longer than I've been married. So we are now on our 4th company together. He is a sales leader, but RevOps is really dependent upon the partnerships that we create across the business. And Phil and I have created a really great partnership in understanding and support of, data and team and process and function. And so really owe all those people a lot for all of the inspiration they provided.
Amazing. And it's so wonderful to have folks who you feel like, hey, we're in it together, partner in crime, jump in, transform a business, be able to see results. That sounds so rewarding.
Yes. Yeah. I could go on. I could list names for hours, but yes. My mom always told me, and some good advice for everybody is that you can learn something from everybody, whether that be good or bad. So from every encounter, every situation, I always try and take something away from it.
So positive. Last but not least, where can people find you if they wanted to connect, if they wanted to hear more about what you're up to, the kind of transformation you're helping companies do? How can people find you online?
Yeah, LinkedIn. Please connect with me. I love having conversations across the board about RevOps or anything SaaS related. So connect with me on LinkedIn, Megan Heinz, or also follow Mainsail Partners on LinkedIn too. We promote a lot of great content on there.
Awesome. Thank you, Meg.
Yeah.
Well, Meg, we've really appreciated this chance to spend time with you today. We appreciate all of your insights that you've shared, all of the learnings, and a little bit about your background and your interests. It's really been a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And again, you all are fabulous to work with. So it was great to have a conversation today about all the work you all are doing in RevOps and across the board.
And I also wanted to thank our audience for being part with us in this very special episode where we not only get to speak to someone who has that RevOps experience, but also is helping lots of other companies do it and not a consultant, right? You're on the investor side. I think that's very, very special. And if you've learned something today, hearing Meg's experience share or found a particular piece of advice useful, please tell someone about the podcast. We'd love to share and build this RevOps community and continue expanding on the learning that we're trying to do together. Thank you again, Meg, for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
And this has been another exciting episode of RevOps Rockstars. See you next time.
Stay classy, Rockstars. And that wraps up another episode. Thank you so much for joining us. For show notes and other episodes, visit RevOpsRockstars.com. RevOps Rockstars is sponsored by OpFocus. Visit opfocus.com to learn more about how OpFocus helps SaaS companies scale their revenue operations.